Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'd like to welcome you to Wetpixel Live. I'd also like to introduce our regular correspondent from down south in the UK, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Evening. Good to see you.
Looks a bit dark down with you. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, it's half term, which is the gap in the middle of the term where the kids have holidays here. So my only recording window is after bedtime for the little one. So yeah, I've snuck away. Can't talk too loudly.
It's kind of fitting though, because what we thought we'd talk about tonight is we talk about night diving, and specifically I was going to ask Alex how he adapts his photographic technique for diving at night and photographing at night, taking pictures at night. So what do you do, Alex? What do you change to make things work at night?
I think, first of all, I'd say that night is a fantastic time to take photos as an underwater photographer. And I know a lot of photographers, particularly, once they've done a fair few dives, they can get pretty lazy about night diving. It's a good time to put the feet up and miss things out. And I do think, particularly on a long liverboard trip or something, skipping those dives can be a mistake. There's nearly always something different to shoot. In terms of adapting technique, actually, I think the key to actually shooting well at night is to play to your strengths, is actually to stick with what you're good at. And trying to completely reinvent and change the way you shoot at night can often make things harder. So if you're struggling to get good results at night, stick with what you do in the day. Just make the necessary adaptations to the gear to do that.
Keep it simple.
The big adaptation that you need to do is first of all, is to add a focus light. Now, I know, depending on where you dive and how bright or dark it is, normally you may already be using this during the day, but at night this becomes an absolutely essential piece of equipment for both finding subjects and then for photographing them. And typically most focus lights now have multiple modes on them that allow you to do all these different tools. To navigate underwater, and particularly to find subjects, you need a focus light, a torch that gives a good spotlight in the water. If you have a torch with a big wide beam all the time, it's basically like driving on a foggy day with your headlights on full beam. You can't see far. And as a result, you're going to struggle to find things. So that spotlight is great for finding subjects. When you actually want to come in and photograph them, a wide beam torch is much better, because if you're using a spotlight, your subject has been in complete darkness and then suddenly it's in a very strong focus beam. With a nice wide beam, you can aim the torch away and just have the sort of the edge of the beam over the subject, and the subject is much more likely to stay relaxed. The third mode that most of these focus lights offer these days, which is great for night diving, is a red light beam. And because red is absorbed so quickly in seawater, this light often does not disturb animals anything like as much as white light does at night. Typically, in my experience, animals are much more disturbed by continuous light from torches and lights than they are from flash. Almost everything, you can flash it and it stays still, it doesn't spook or anything. Whereas when you approach stuff with big, with continuous light, you tend to get more of a reaction from the subject. And that's why things like red light is really good. The camera can still focus really well in a completely red light beam, so you can take your pictures. What you lack, though, when you're using the red light mode is you don't see the colors of subjects well. And so it makes it harder to get exactly the composition you want, because maybe you miss out that there's some really nice colorful background that you could utilize, or indeed some distractingly colored background that you'd want to keep out of the composition. So I think that's an important aspect, is that you need to, if you're shooting with red light, make sure you're reviewing as well to make sure you're not getting something unwanted in the picture of a color that you didn't realize at the time.
Yeah, there's some very versatile lights that have a combination. They normally have multiple LEDs and can have a wide beam, a tightly focused spotting beam, and a red beam, so all built into one package, which is very convenient. But if you don't have those, then obviously there is the option of carrying a second torch, which you use for spotting. And that does have the built-in advantage that you can also use that, if need be, for shining light onto your camera controls, for example, if you're not sure, if you need to find a control or something like that.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the things I'm going to come onto next, actually. Just quickly on focus lights, one question I'm always asked is, how do you stop the worms buzzing around your light? There's a few things that you can do to minimize this, but it does vary greatly place to place. Some places you can dive all night with a massive great light and really not have a big problem. Other places, 1 minute in the water and you're surrounded by a swarm.
Mm.
If I know I'm going to dive in an area with loads and loads of buzzing plankton in the water, first of all, I'll put my torch on a low power. The less bright it is, the less you'll attract. Particularly if your buddy has his on a really high power, they'll all go and bother him and leave you alone.
Yeah.
You can also, during the dive, turn it off for various portions of the, when you're maybe swimming from one area to another, or you're swimming from where you are to where a guide is flashing a light to get your attention. Turn it off for a second or two and swim across. That way you give it a little break. The third thing you can do is to put it, instead of having it just mounted directly onto the housing, is to mount it on quite a long strobe arm, so it's up above the housing. You'll still get as many worms, but they won't be between the lens and the subject so much.
Yeah. I mean, that's the frustrating thing with them, is that sometimes they actually do get in the shot, and they
Yeah.
play havoc with autofocus and all sorts of things. So by removing the light from in front of the lens, that's really important.
Yeah, if you put it up high and you put it on the wide beam, you
Yeah.
then don't also create a spotlight on the sand. Because one problem I've seen people do, they'll put the torch up really high, put it on a spot beam, and then there's a bright spot on the seabed, and you have one clump of worms on the torch, and the other clump of worms on the sand, right where the
Yeah.
subject is. So a nice wide beam actually stops that happening.
Yeah.
For focusing. Right, onto the housing, and I think you already talked about this, is that actually a real challenge often of using a housing at night is you can't read the labels on the buttons. Now, obviously, everyone knows where their shutter speed is and their aperture and shutter speed are, but sometimes you might want to change ISO at night, and on some housings, depending on where things are, that can be quite fiddly to find. So buttons you think you need to know, make sure you've got a good idea where they are before the dive. A great way to test that is if you're in a camera room or in your cabin on a liveaboard or a hotel room, just close your eyes and say, right, I want to change the ISO. How do I do it? And you'll actually find it's relatively easy to build up that knowledge, so that you can do it, time and time again. It's really just that little bit of preparation.
I think it's worth practicing sort of close to the time as well. In that, I always find the first couple of night dives, when I haven't dived for a while at night, I always scratch my head a bit, and then my muscle memory returns and I can remember what I'm doing. So it's a good opportunity just to refresh yourself as well, just before you go, particularly if you haven't dived at night for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a time when I think when housing manufacturers put some of those important controls on different levers, that can really help, because then right, that lever is my image review button, and it's easy to find. Whereas trying to remember which of a row of buttons on the back or the bottom of the housing an image playback is a little bit harder. I think another thing that housing manufacturers do that can really help is they actually use different shapes and different size buttons on the back of the housings, so you can remember, the big one is okay, or the big one is play, and those things are really helpful. If you think you're going to need to go into the menus to change autofocus mode, maybe you're going to start using thumb focus or something because you're struggling with autofocus. Again, being able to find those things. Of course, you can take your spare focus torch, spare light out of your pocket and shine things around, but that's a very slow way of doing things, and it's just going to make you less efficient. And the aim of this talk is to make you more efficient. So I think that those things are really important. I actually got caught out by this on one of my most recent night dives, in that on my Subal housing, Subal have very thoughtfully positioned the white balance button in a place that they feel is more ergonomic. But because I don't change the white balance very much, and I've never really needed to change the white balance at night very much, I could not remember where it was on my dive, because I'm also shooting with two different housings, and it's in a different place on my D5 to my D850, and it just really caught me out on the night dive. And I wanted to change. I was diving in Devon in the UK, and the cliffs there are very red, and so the sand that we were diving over, shooting critters on, was also quite a very red brown, and all my pictures were coming out super warm. And I was on the dive going, I've got to put my white balance to some sort of fixed number to check this is real. And I just couldn't find my white balance. Thankfully, when I got back after the dive, it's actually all fine. But just on the dive, I was seeing my LCD screen, and it was confusing me.
So that reminds me, we were going to talk about LCD screens. I think both Alex and I use our LCD screens to estimate our exposure, and with practice you can get pretty accurate at it. But obviously the problem you've got at night, because you've got increased contrast, is anything on an LCD screen will look brighter than it actually is. I think that's right, isn't it, Alex?
Yeah, it's just your eyes are used to the dark. You're used to seeing your screen during the day, used to a certain brightness. And what I see typically on my workshop is people typically underexposed their night dive shots by about a stop. It's not just a small bit. They tend to quite significantly underexpose their pictures. They look great on the dive in the darkness. When they come up to the boat and download them, they find them all underexposed. And people often say, "Oh, use the histogram." A lot of nighttime shots have a lot of black in them, and if you're not good at reading the histogram, it can actually be very confusing, because you have a histogram with a lot of black in it. You think you're exposing well, and you're not. So they can be, or you're on the white sand, and again, the histogram is, because a lot of night dives tend to be over sand. You can be really confused. Yeah. I think one of the best things to do is to make sure you have your overexposure blinkies going. Yeah. And if you're not seeing those from time to time on a night dive, you probably are underexposing everything, and just to be wary of it. The other trick that I use is I will make sure that before the night dive in the afternoon, I take an above water picture with my camera. Just stick the camera on auto and take a picture, of the sea and the horizon, or the boat, or just something. And then anytime you're unsure of an exposure, just go forward one picture when reviewing. That will show you the first picture on the card, which is your above water picture taken in the afternoon. And then you've got a direct comparison. If you bring that picture up and it looks super bright, chances are you are underexposing your whole dive. And it's just something to watch for. But yeah, both those things. And it's a very common problem. It's not the end of the world these days. We've got that flexibility in our files to adjust it. But, if you're aware of the problem, you tend not to fall into the trap. And then all your exposures are absolutely nailed. And you just get that slightly better image quality from your pictures.
Yeah, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish off by talking about a few of the things that night dives are well suited for shooting. Yep. A technique that a lot of people, which we did an episode on relatively recently, a lot of people like to do at night, is fluorescence photography. Yep. Doesn't need to be done at night, but it's a lot easier to find subjects at night, and generally the technique can be overwhelmed by strong daylight. So it definitely, in some places, it needs to be done at night. So fluorescent photography is a good night dive technique. In terms of lens choice, night diving is typically easiest as a macro photography challenge. I would imagine most people watching this have done night dives and shot in macro. But if you're looking to differentiate your portfolio from other photographers, why not try wide angle at night? How many people, can say that they've shot wide angle at night? It's a lot fewer than have shot macro, I can be sure. And it's a great way. And although I don't shoot a lot of wide angle at night, a lot of my best known or certainly appreciated images by other underwater photographers are night diving macro images. I've done work with tripods and long exposures.
Night diving wide angle.
Night diving wide angle pictures. Sorry, yep. I've done long exposure pictures with tripods. I've done wide angle reef scenes, done creative stuff, done coral spawning, done some big animal encounters at night, and they create some really interesting and unusually different pictures. So don't be afraid of shooting wide angle at night. You just need to be really on top of your lighting, because you haven't got any ambient light to fill in any mistakes in your lighting. So you need to be really precise with your strobe positioning, really precise with your strobe aiming and your strobe powers, and then you can shoot great wide angle at night.
And think about light painting, stuff like that as well. Creative use of light that you can get away with. Continuous light. There's lots of techniques there that lend themselves very much to when there's not much ambient light around. So yeah. A lot of creativity, and I think it's a very untapped area of underwater photography. If anyone's looking for a way to maybe create some images that stand out from the crowd, wide angle lens at night, maybe with a tripod or with off camera lighting, really interesting area. And then I think the thing I started off by saying is important, just to reiterate that, if you do struggle to get good pictures at night, stick with what you're good at. Don't go down loaded up with accessories. They're harder, easy to lose at night and things like that. Keep it simple, but do what you're used to doing during the day. If you shoot all your macro with a particular lens during the day, use that same lens at night. Don't suddenly change everything for a night dive. And I think again, local knowledge is very useful here, because local knowledge will also tell you what critters are likely to be out at night. So although it's good to shoot the same techniques, maybe try and find things that are different at night that you're gonna that you're not going to see in daytime. And generally be aware of the fact that there is this change and shift between daytime and nighttime, and often you can capitalize on that with by choosing your subjects.
No, that's a really, really, really great point. Is there's no point going on a night dive and shooting shots you could shot in the day. Exactly, this is a chance to get a whole host of different species, and a whole host of different behaviors, even, different color patterns on fish and things like that. You can really diversify your portfolio by diving at night. So yeah, definitely find out what's unusual, what's about, and focus on those subjects. Create pictures that could only be created at night.
Yeah. Fascinating. Do you tag your images night, Alex?
Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm not always. I would like to say I should always, and I think it would be a really important thing to do. But I would imagine there's a fair few that aren't. I do have to say, when I write captions, do try and include it, because obviously, if you're showing a behavior, particularly, or a species that's more often seen at night, I think it's important to put that in the caption. So I would imagine, I know where you're going, is that on my website, if you typed in night, I think you've got a good chance of getting a good selection of night photography pictures.
Yeah, excellent. So have a look at. That's wonderful. So thank you very much, Alex. I'd also like to thank Chris at Lembe Resort for sponsoring this episode. I'd like to thank you all for watching, as always. I hope it's been valuable, and that if you have found it valuable, you'll leave us a like, and please feel free to add to the discussion in the comment section, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.